share.
Okay, let's begin.
Yeah, you're live now.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Michela from Huobi Global. Very excited for this broadcast as we will be interviewing Alex, the author of Digital Asset Revolution. We will be going through quite a few interesting topics with him. And without further ado, Alex, would you mind introducing yourself to our whole audience?
Well, hi, thanks. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Alex Tapscott. Among other things, I'm the author of an upcoming book called Digital Asset Revolution, which is available on Amazon for pre-order right now. I'm also the founder of the Blockchain Research Institute, which is the largest independent think tank in the world focused on blockchain use cases for business. And I'm also the head of the digital asset group at 9 Point Partners, which is an $8 billion asset management firm based here in Toronto, Canada, which is where I am right now. So I know you're tuning in from all over the world, and I'm delighted to be sharing this time with you. So thanks.
Perfect. So let's go through one of the topics that caught my attention. The first one will be, you said that in the book that Decentralized Finance is eating Wall Street. Why? Why do you think that it's eating Wall Street?
Yeah, so decentralized finance to me is one of the most important innovations in a long time. And it's obviously an extension of the innovation that's been enabled by crypto more generally. And the reason that I find it so fascinating is that for the past 30 years or so, the internet has transformed a lot of different industries. It's changed the media business, it's changed publishing, it's changed how we search for information, how we consume content, how we interact online. But it actually hasn't had as big an impact on financial services as I think a lot of people initially expected. And the reason for that is that the internet, the first era of the internet, is not really a medium for value, it's a medium for information. And typically that's actually a good thing. So, if I send you something by using the internet, I can send the same thing to someone else. We can host this webinar, anybody can tune in. It's like we all have a printing press for information, which makes it great as a communication tool. But when it comes to, moving and organizing assets, being able to create copies or to duplicate things is actually a big problem, right? So it's important that, if I send money or sell a share of a company or do some other transaction, that it's one of a kind. Because if I can do it over and over again, then that asset becomes worthless. So in the same way that the internet replaced a lot of legacy media businesses with software, I think that DeFi is going to replace a lot of aspects of what Wall Street does with software as well. And my opinion is that DeFi is reimagining or reinventing a lot of the fundamental building blocks of what the financial industry does from the ground up. And that's really important as an innovation. So, if Bitcoin, for example, sort of changed how we move value, created a digitally native medium for money, then DeFi is reimagining everything the industry does peer-to-peer. So not just how we move money, but how we store it, how we access credit, how we exchange assets, how we get access to growth capital, how we insure against risk, how we analyze and audit information. And all of those things collectively are worth trillions of dollars every single year to the global economy. And DeFi, though it's still early stages, is clearly making a lot of progress towards gobbling a lot of those things up. And that makes it quite an exciting space to be in.
It's interesting because I was intrigued myself, and I also asked myself, what is going to be disrupting Wall Street first? DeFi or CeFi? In this case, do you think that exchanges will have a key role on the digital transformation that Wall Street is going through now? Or do you think that DeFi will probably be dominating a lot more the space? What is your thought on that?
Well, I think both are clearly already having an impact. Today, many centralized, CeFi exchanges in crypto are, as big, if not bigger, than a lot of legacy financial services companies. And what started as a platform for trading crypto assets has evolved into a platform for more and different kinds of financial services, right? But I also think that DeFi is where a lot of more of the growth will occur in the long run. And there's a couple of reasons for that. And actually the recent turmoil in markets, I think highlights the reasons why. So a lot of people are looking at the troubled state of a lot of centralized crypto platforms, especially certain lenders, companies like BlockFi, Voyager, Celsius, and others, and concluding that crypto is to blame. Well, actually the opposite is true. What's happening here is that centralized lenders have taken on too much risk and are unable to meet their obligations to their customers and to their creditors. And that's a problem that's existed for hundreds of years in financial services. And it's something that, probably you and your audience might not be old enough to recall, but was central to the financial crisis in 2007 and 2008. And you could go back in history, 1929, 1907, 1873. This is a credit crisis that's caused by bad banks being insolvent, basically. What's interesting in contrast to that is how a lot of DeFi protocols have continued to operate seamlessly during this crisis. Now, it doesn't mean that they haven't seen their assets decline or that their users are losing money with prices going down. Of course, that's true, but they continue to operate smoothly. And part of that reason is that the code is open source and that they're operated transparently. And what's unique to me is that I think that the outcome of all of this turmoil that we're seeing in the markets will be that a few large, well-capitalized CeFi players will probably capture more market share as a result of this decline of some of their competitors. But also a lot of users will realize the inherent risk of keeping their assets on an exchange that could potentially gate their money, which is what's happened with these players. And so maybe we end up in a world where a handful of centralized platforms, maybe Huobi, Binance, Coinbase, Kraken, a couple of others, end up being winners in this whole thing. But more and more users choose to interact peer-to-peer using DeFi instead. I think the idea of keeping your money in some centralized platform to earn an extra 7% is going to become a lot less fashionable. It's kind of like trying to pick up pennies in front of a freight train, right? I mean, you can pick them up, but in a while, wait long enough and you might get hurt, right? So I think that that's sort of the outcome of all this. So the growth is going to come from both areas, but I think DeFi probably has a brighter future long-term.
What do you think are the barriers right now that DeFi has to overcome in order to provide value for a lot of entities in Wall Street? What do you think is missing for Wall Street to completely adopt DeFi?
Well, there are several implementation challenges to widespread DeFi adoption. I'll go through them sort of one by one. For the average user, for the average customer, I think the biggest problem is the usability of a lot of these platforms. It's not particularly intuitive for a lot of people who maybe aren't used to having a wallet like MetaMask, Kepler, or something like that, who aren't used to custodying their own assets, who don't know about cold storage or private keys and all this other stuff. So I think that there's definitely a bit of a learning curve now, which makes it more for enthusiasts than it would be for the average person. So I think that you need to improve that experience significantly. The second issue would be that for Wall Street firms and other regulated entities to get into this space, there needs to be basically compliant DeFi. So I'm not suggesting that DeFi itself all become, like traditional financial services. I think for a lot of individuals, especially globally, interacting with these protocols as a way to move and store money or access investments or get access to credit, whatever it is, should remain anonymous and peer-to-peer. But for a lot of traditional firms, they need to do KYC and AML and these other sort of requirements, not only for customers, but also for counterparties and vendors and everyone else. So I think in the future, I can imagine, compliant Uniswap and compliant Aave and compliant Compound, basically pools segregated from the traditional main protocol, where Wall Street firms and other regulated entities can interact, sort of like a sandbox where they can play within their own set of rules, essentially. And then, so that's another implementation challenge, which I think will be overcome. And then the third thing, and this to me is probably the most challenging or difficult part of making DeFi scale globally, is that right now, the criticism of DeFi is that it doesn't export any economic value beyond the crypto world. So people put money into a lending protocol, get access to a loan, which they take to go buy more tokens, and the goes around and around in a circle. That's not totally fair. Lots of people have built wealth in this asset class and would like to borrow against that asset rather than selling it and triggering a capital gains tax, for example. And this is something that happens in traditional finance all the time. People borrow against their home, they borrow against their securities portfolio in order to fund their day-to-day. So lots of economic value could be being extracted by borrowing against these assets to go, I don't know, buy a car, go on vacation, put a down payment on a house, you name it. There's lots of different real economic implications of this. But still, I think it's fundamentally true that most DeFi lending and most DeFi activity today is collateralized loans. I think it all is pretty much. And this is an important thing to understand, right? Because if you want to, you would never be able to access a loan through a DeFi protocol if all you had to rely on was your word as the borrower, because these are anonymous peer-to-peer, peer-to-peer contract sort of interactions. So what would stop you from just taking the money and running, right? So what we need really is sort of a DeFi credit score, a way to basically create a digital identity for people that they can use as a reputation in order to access, credit and get access to other financial services. To my knowledge, there's no one who's doing this really well. If there are, send me a DM on Twitter. I'd be curious to see. There have been attempts at the digital identity solution for crypto, but it's been slow. It's been slow coming. I don't really know how exactly this would work, but one idea would be in traditional proof of stake systems. There's this thing called slashing, where basically if you don't you're not a good actor in the network, then you can have some of the tokens that you staked basically slashed or lost. Could you perhaps have a reputational score, where if you didn't pay back a loan or you didn't act with integrity, that your reputational score was slashed as well, and that made it more difficult to interact with DeFi in the future. I'm sure there's a zillion problems with that, but one idea for how to actually put this into practice. So all of those things, whether it's can Wall Street firms interact with DeFi in a compliant way, will we be able to scale these systems and make them usable for the average person? And three, can we expand DeFi beyond the crypto world to more to greater and greater economic interactions? Those are three big challenges. But the question is, are they reasons that this is a bad idea or we shouldn't pursue it? Or are they implementation challenges to be overcome? And in my opinion, they're all implementation challenges to be overcome. And they can be overcome and they should be overcome. And the reason for that is that we've got an opportunity to rewire the economic power grid and rebuild the financial services industry in a way that is more transparent, more resilient, more open, and more private. And I think those are things that we should all be striving for.
It's pretty interesting, your point of view. In fact, you have changed my mind on a lot of aspects in the last few minutes. I think that indeed, if institutions will have applied the score system, we wouldn't have gone through the lending crisis the crypto space is going right now, right? Which is very similar to 2008. And I think that this brought us to another question, which will be, what type of infrastructure do you think that is going to be seen in the capital markets in the next few years? Because in your book you said that DeFi is now becoming a very interesting new architecture for the financial system. How do you see that architecture? What's the shape of it?
Well, it's a great point. I think that what's interesting about DeFi relative to a lot of other innovation in financial services, and typically referred to as fintech, is that a lot of fintech innovation happens on the surface or at the margins of the industry. So, if you think about a lot of popular payment apps or investing apps, or point of sale processing technology, whatever it is, really what it's doing is creating a better user interface for people to interact with the old world of financial services. So if you use the Robinhood app to buy shares, you're still buying it on the stock exchange, interacting with traditional, financial intermediaries. If you're using Venmo, you're really just moving entries in a ledger on a bank between one account and the other account. There's not actually a lot of big innovation happening under the surface. I think, frankly, that DeFi could learn a lot from fintech innovation and how to build consumer applications which are easy to use. That was to one of my three big challenges, which is how do you make this, more accessible? But when it comes to the actual innovation, there's to me at least, there's not a lot of new architecture being built in fintech. DeFi is different. DeFi to me is trying to reimagine the fundamental building blocks of what the industry does from the ground up. Financial services is more than any one industry. It's the cardiovascular system for the global economy. It is the essential organ. I mean, all organs are essential, but it pumps the blood of economic activity, money, through the system to keep it running. So it's more than any one industry, but it fundamentally does sort of 9 things. And those 9 things are we've outlined in the book, and continue to return back to and expand as more information comes available. But those 9 things are basically, it allows you to move money, store money, access credit, get access to growth capital, exchange assets, insure against risk, 6, analyze value, audit value, and do identity. Those are the 9 sort of functions of the industry. And all 9 of those, jazz hands, all 9 of those things are being reimagined by DeFi, and some in more substantive ways than other, right? So I would say that, for example, moving value, well, stable coins like DAI, the idea of, creating medium of exchange pegged to the dollar, over collateralized with crypto, all happening in a crypto native way, is kind of like a big deal. That's a pretty amazing innovation. And to me, that's an example of rethinking how we move money completely in a totally decentralized way. Same with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the kind of the original DeFi in a sense, because it is fully decentralized. But if you look at lending, we've got these lending pools like Compound and Aave, which are being used by traditional financial players, like some of the CeFi players. And I think increasingly will be used by a lot of Wall Street firms. To me, have grown significantly. If you look at how we fund and invest, most of these new kinds of entities that are being created in crypto are being created as DAOs. And one of the reasons for that is that you can constitute this entity, you can have this governance token, which functions like equity, gives shareholders, a stake in the, in the direction of this thing. But it also is a really powerful tool for raising capital, frankly. Your token increases in value the more useful and more widely used your app becomes, the more you can liquidate it and pay for the development of the project. And then if you look at other aspects, it's a little less developed, right? So this idea of identity in financial services and traditional financial services is very well established. In fact, it's actually the basic building block of all of this. You can't get access to a bank account, or you can't get access to a brokerage account without being able to demonstrate who you are, without being able to do that KYC and AML. And one of the reasons why over 1 billion people don't have access to financial services globally is because they don't have a digital, or they don't have their own identity, right? A lot of countries are not organized enough to issue passports or to keep, records of property ownership and all the other things that we would use in places like Canada or in the UK to, get access, to prove that you are who you are and get access to financial services. So to me, in one sense, DeFi has removed the requirement for that identity, right? Because you can access it anonymously. But to my earlier point, if you want to expand it to include all manner of financial services, including, things like, in the traditional world, it'd be things like credit card loans, buy now, pay later, or auto loans, unsecured lines of credit, all these other kinds of things that are essential to the functioning of the economy. Credit is sort of key building block. None of that really exists yet in DeFi. And I think you need to solve that identity question first in order to do that. So of those 9 things, some are quite advanced and others are still a work in progress.
Okay. I'm pretty curious about one thing. The KYC part. You said that KYC will somehow be essential, right, to access those pools and the rest of tools that DeFi give us. How do you see those new KYC processes interacting with the ones that already exist? Because somehow it does need to be or at least I see it like that. You can contradict me if you feel so, but how do you see those KYC process in DeFi connected with what we call TradFi? Should be there an interaction between the two, specifically on KYC?
It's a great question, and I'm not sure that I'm qualified to answer it. Yeah, there are lots of people who probably know more about this than I do. I think that, like I said, most DeFi doesn't need KYC because we're talking about individuals voluntarily engaging in economic activity online. With these protocols, people should be free to do that as far as I'm concerned. And there shouldn't be a requirement to do KYC if they're truly interacting with a protocol, right? If they're interacting with a counterparty or they're, a custodial provider like a traditional CeFi, then I do think that those kinds of requirements are important. But when it comes to DeFi, I think in general, there should be a very light touch. But I do think that eventually we're going to need compliant DeFi for traditional intermediaries, simply because those companies themselves are regulated and they're under, the obligation to adhere to the rules, to adhere to rules, period. And so in order to do that, we need to create some solutions, right, to make DeFi accessible to them. Again, I'm not totally sure what that looks like, but the idea of segregated pools that are DeFi compliant, that are KYC compliant is one way to think about it.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about the segregated pools. I think that is a very innovative concept. Probably could be one of the most interesting products out there. I think myself, I speak in the name of my company. It would be pretty interesting to see how DeFi comes with those services. Now, just to start wrapping up, I will say, what do you think is going to be the next big trend in DeFi? I want to say, but the next big trend is what is going to be dominating the market this year? Because again, we're coming out of this lending crisis that probably DeFi could have helped to overcome. So what do you think is going to be the next big trend for the next 2 quarters? How do you see DeFi coming along in this recovery?
Well, I think that DeFi, what's interesting is we're talking about DeFi, and on the fundamentals, like last year, 2021, was a huge year for DeFi in the sense that total value increased, user activity increased, innovation was happening across different platforms, not just Ethereum, but in Solana and Avalanche and Cosmos, all these different sort of platforms. But at the same time, a lot of the blue chip DeFi names didn't perform well, the native token at least. So like if you'd used Uniswap, excuse me, you would have enjoyed the product, but as a holder of the Uni token, you probably weren't too happy with the price performance relative to the rest of the market. You would have been better off speculating on new layer 1 protocol tokens like Solana, for example. So I think that if 2022 to me is a year where I think the market will start to realize that the DeFi names themselves, a lot of value is actually accruing to these tokens. And especially for the projects that have protocol revenue. One project that I really, really like is a thing called the SX network. Full disclosure, I'm an investor and advisor in that project, but it's the largest prediction network blockchain in the world. And it's got really unique tokenomics where it has actually some of the highest protocol revenue of any project in DeFi. It's basically a blockchain that allows you to wager on the outcome of future events, including things like sports and politics, and has done, I think, over $300 million of betting volume in the last year. So this is a project that's got sound economics where there's protocol revenue and where they're seeing greater user adoption. All of those things would be the kinds of metrics that I'd be looking for. I think prediction markets are going to be really interesting this year. I think SX is really well positioned. I also think that lending, the CDFI crisis, or whatever you want to call it, that we're in currently with these centralized lenders, I think, to my earlier point, is revealing the benefits of decentralization and transparency. And so I think that a lot of those protocols will see people on the margin moving from centralized to decentralized lending pools. And then, like I said, what am I looking for longer term? To figure out this, identity for DeFi question, I don't think it's a next 2 quarters catalysts as your question was sort of framed, but it's something that in the long run I think will create a lot of value.
Yeah, you couldn't have answered that question better. Indeed, I completely agree with you. Now, I think that to start giving people a little bit of bridge to what your book will be like, who your book is directed to, who should be right now going to Amazon and purchasing your book? Who is your book writing for?
The book is intended for anybody who's curious about the future and who wants to understand the most important technology that's changing, financial services in the world, pretty much. So to me, it's a book for everybody. It's obviously especially useful if you're building companies in this space, or if you're a business leader in a company that's trying to understand how DeFi impacts your firm or your industry. And I think it's also useful if you're an investor who's trying to understand the big trends that are shaping this industry. And it's very accessible. I wrote the preface in the first chapter. Some of the other chapters are written by some of the most esteemed colleagues that we have at our research institute, best-selling authors, business builders, CEOs of billion-dollar projects, of the former chairman of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. These are all our contributors in our book, and I think it's going to be, will be an enormously valuable resource for people if they're willing to take a shot and to read the book. I think they'll really enjoy it.
Yeah, honestly, I have learned so much with you in 27 minutes. I'm pretty sure that that's not even a chapter of your book. We can go further than this. So Alex, I have been extremely honored to interview you today. I will go through your book this year. I think that this is definitely something that is needed in the industry. Myself, I'm passionate about fintech, and I think I have learned so much about how much is lacking in fintech to at this moment. And I will definitely be in contact with you for a second interview this year with Huobi Live. Anything else you would like to add? Maybe probably your social media, Twitter, email, Telegram. What's the best way to contact you, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on Twitter at Alex Tapscott. I also host a weekly podcast called DeFi Decoded, which I encourage you to check out on YouTube or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. Also check out our website, digital.ninepoint.com, and check out the book. It's available on Amazon, as I said, for pre-order, I think worldwide. So anybody who wants can grab a copy. So check that out too.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Alex. Extremely, again, grateful for your time and your knowledge. Unbelievable. And yeah, see you on the next one.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Bye-bye.